Hi, folks. Welcome to Hat Friday at I Write Radio. Podcast and videocast, I should say. We're going to have a chat about today's press conference with Nicola Sturgeon, Unionists on the March, Peter A. Bell's piece. I don't think it was actually titled that, but he had some strange quote, didn't he? Something about thumbs. Alliance for Unity, which is George, gorgeous George, God, I've forgotten his name. Galloway's new party. And I'd like a wee chat about the Joyce McMillan piece, where she discusses why Labour has become such an enemy of the SNP when it wasn't always the case. We'll kick off with the press conference.
Well, it's by the pricking of my thumbs.
What was the second part?
No, right. Something wicked this way comes.
That's it. Something wicked this way comes is the part
it's
of the
a quote from Macbeth.
Act 4, Scene 1, but I would never know.
Well, I didn't do Macbeth at school. I did Hamlet.
Hubble, bubble, bobag's trouble.
Oh, Jimmy, you're in form.
Today's press conference kind of swayed between Aberdeen Football Club and the SQA debacle.
Oh, no, it's not a debacle.
Jimmy, you get first bite of the cherry.
Yeah. Nicola Sturgeon was, I think she quite enjoyed the opportunity to slap a football club, if I'm honest. A couple of questions on Aberdeen and their idiot players, and they were idiots going to a city centre pub after you've been pumped to drown your sorrows. Doesn't seem like following the football bubble that they were supposed to be keeping in. But
so,
I mean, they only got beat 1-0 last week. But guys, they didn't have a single shot on target in the entire game. So I've no idea what they were out celebrating. Maybe their own ineptitude. Let's be clear: Aberdeen players of the past would have had just a barn dance with a few flosses and a big carry out, but not they had to go and do in the city centre and make arses of themselves.
Oh dear. You'd never guess.
Well, frankly, mate, I think they're getting off lightly. I think Aberdeen should forfeit the game. They should lose this weekend's game with St Johnstone 3-0, because it's Aberdeen's FC's absolute responsibility that this game is not going on. So that would have been a suitable punishment, and it would have sent out a suitable message.
Well, no, okay. She did say herself that there was a possibility of the game going ahead with the weakened Aberdeen side, and that might have been a big enough sanction. But I'll be honest with you, secretly I think she was thinking, oh, this is good. I can really lay it on thick. Here's the threat. Behave yourself, or something's going to happen, bad.
Jimmy, you're kind of the football expert amongst us. What is the football bubble? What does that constitute?
Basically, they are meant to mix with their family and the players at the club. As professional sportsmen, they know what they're meant to do. The rules were laid out, and they clearly seen what happens if you don't stay in your professional sport bubble, because Geoffrey Archer, the England cricketer, was dropped for the second test last week because he nipped into his house rather than going back to his hotel where he was meant to be staying for the entirety of the test series. So they knew fine well they shouldn't be in a pub, but they decided to go anyway. As I say, I'm not sure that the punishment fits the crime. I think they should be punished harsher, but then I do hate Aberdeen Football Club, so I may be somewhat biased in that regard.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Jimmy. That's fine, because the listeners were entitled to know.
Absolutely.
I think the most pertinent question that was asked, I can't remember who asked it, was, did the Scottish government call the game off? Why do journalists think the Scottish government have the power to dictate to the Scottish Football Association?
Aye, but the game was going ahead up till the point where the Scottish government got the SPFL and the SFA on the phone this morning and told them it wasn't going ahead. They were perfectly happy, and let's be honest, they were breaking their own rules, because Aberdeen have one player who has it and 7 players who are self-isolating. So Aberdeen are missing 8 first-team players. And by the rules of football, if you're missing 5 first-team regulars, the game can be postponed. That's if they've got a flu outbreak or something like that.
Right.
So they were willing to break the rules of what they normally would do to get that game on yesterday. So if they were willing to do that, they were pretty sure that that game was going ahead. They were desperate to make it go ahead. So it's only it's only the Scottish Government putting them on a Zoom call and slapping them about the place that's had that game called off, mate.
And St Johnstone, it was to be played at St Johnstone, wasn't it? So they're the ones that are going to suffer financially.
Well, there shouldn't.
No, there's not going to be a lot of money involved.
There shouldn't be, because there's no crowd. But I'm not sure that game wasn't. I think that game was due to be on TV.
Aye.
I'm pretty aye. So that would be St Johnstone dipping out on 20 grand or whatever that they get for each.
Which
TV
I would
game.
imagine is sorely needed at the moment.
Well,
Aye.
yes, obviously, but at the same time, return to the issue, it's about the pandemic, and it's about freedom to do what you want or abiding by the rules. And it's the example that this will set. I mean, you've got what's happened in Aberdeen with the pubs and the Aberdeen with the football club. I mean, as I said, I'm sure the First Minister secretly is delighted to be able to scalp these people.
I think so. I think
well,
also
it was agreed. It was agreed between the football authorities and the Scottish Government what the rules would be.
But she just needed an example. Look, I'm going to restrict your freedom to do what you want if you don't behave, is what she was threatening.
And
I think also gave us,
as part of that, the face masks are becoming mandatory in certain hospitality situations now.
Aye.
That's a new move.
I'm not so sure it was hospitality, but it was libraries, museums, and places of worship.
That's why I said certain hospitality, Stuart.
Didn't know you could eat in any of these places.
Well, you can't eat in a museum.
I've no idea if these places have got the cafes open automatically.
Hospitality doesn't mean that you can eat in somewhere. It's leisure and hospitality. Let's be clear about it. But it also gave her the opportunity to crack the whip with pubs.
Yeah.
To reinforce certain things that probably 90% of pubs haven't been doing.
I think you're right.
i.e. loud tellies and background music. Because I'm pretty sure that every pub has been playing music and they shouldn't be.
And no standing at the bar, no queuing at the bar, no queuing to get in, free book. I mean, are these things happening? I've not been in a pub. I mean,
well, the queuing was supposed to be socially distanced.
Aye.
And they were the photographs that were all over social media.
So now they're saying no queuing. Aye. They're basically having a wee crackdown on it. And the Aberdeen scenario has given them the opportunity to bring about that crackdown and to remind people within the hospitality industry throughout Scotland that don't be lax on any of this, because if you're not, we will shut you down. We will take your licence and just tell you to shut again. And let's be honest, we do know, I've been in pubs that haven't been taking any details whatsoever. So now that's mandatory that they have to take details.
But it also, to go back to the football, there's an aspect of it. It's the fact that footballers, well-paid footballers, are regarded as, they're regarded as, oh God, my brain's gone today again.
Role models.
Role models, that's the word. So that's another aspect. I mean, that's why they had to be punished.
See, I always have a problem with that. I always have a problem with politicians telling football players they're role models, because let's be honest, football players generally, particularly in Scotland, are some of the most poorly educated individuals in the country. The guys that make it to professional football in Scotland have usually stopped doing anything other than playing football at school by the time they're 14. So to impose upon them the role of role model and expect them to live to a higher standard, particularly when it comes to politicians who are known for setting standards and then not living up to them. It's always stuck in my craw a wee bit.
I'm not entirely sure that you can accuse politicians of imposing that label on them. I mean,
but they take every opportunity. They take every opportunity to label these people role models, mate.
Well, I mean, I think the point I'm making is you become a role model in football due to your abilities or whatever, and you don't ask for it as a footballer. it comes from the fans, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jimmy, you're being ridiculous here to suggest.
Oh, really?
You are to suggest that football stars, like even at Hibs and Hearts level, are not role models for wee laddies.
Of course. Well, how are they? Wee laddies aren't going to pubs, mate. Do you really? I didn't look at a central midfielder for Dunfermline and feel that he can influence my life in any way, shape, or form more than a politician can.
Are you 14? No.
Oh, hold it. So wait a minute. Footballers misbehaving will make 14-year-olds misbehave.
Yes.
If you think that, you're a bigger arse than two bums, mate.
Oh dear, you don't need to be rude.
Well, you just are. I don't believe for a second.
Well,
Willie Johnson took drugs in 1978 in Argentina. Do you think that made a lot of Scottish laddies? Do you think that's why the heroin thing kicked off in the 80s?
Yeah, okay, carry on. Live in your wee cloud cuckoo land.
Okay, lads, let's not get personal. The second string of the presser was really what? It was about the exam. I'm going to call it a debacle, but I don't mean it was a debacle for the SQA. I mean, it's been a debacle in the press. What I found really interesting today is the English exam authority is about to adopt the Scottish model.
For appeals?
Yeah. So instead of being very difficult to get an appeal, or in fact, were they even going to allow appeals? I can't remember.
I don't think they were, mate. I think they were going to allow appeals. Well, they were going to allow very, very few and very exceptional circumstances.
Think about it. If they've changed their plan this late in the time, because I think it's next week they get the results, how are they going to find the resources and the staff to deal with all these appeals?
Well, the interesting thing for me is what are the Times, the Express, the Sun, etc., going to start asking Nicola Sturgeon at the press conferences when their headlines in England are English SQA makes mess of exam results.
Well, remember that there are 5 or 6 examination boards in England. So Stuart's point's right on that one. Where are they going to get the staff to start doing an appeals process that up until today they weren't considering having? I mean, are they going to outsource it to Circle or Carillion or whatever?
Almost certainly.
Can sort them out with that.
Unless, of course, Liz Truss has a pal who used to be a teacher that can start his own company.
Aye, he'll do it all.
But it'll be interesting because she'll have the opportunity to turn it back on them by saying, well, England seems to think enough of the system that they're adopting it.
Well, don't you think the fact that they weren't going to have an appeal system in England up until today, it's a very English way to do things? I
think they've always had an appeal system, Jimmy.
Aye, they have, mate, but they weren't planning to have a major appeal system this year. They were planning to do what the SQA did, i.e. moderate results, and then those results were going to stand. That was, in fact, they were imposing upon students results that Neil Findlay and the opposition parties and virtually all of the press have said is an iniquitous way to do things. But they were just going to go ahead and do that in England.
I think it's also interesting that it's a case of Scotland leading the way here, because, as you say, it looks awful like the appeals process anyway was going to be as it ever was, not being quite as open as they intend it to be now.
Look, whatever system they decided to use, given that they couldn't hold the exams, it didn't matter what it was going to be challenged.
Of course it was, yeah, of course it was. But I think, interestingly, if it turns out there's a lot of successful individual appeals, and the percentage of kids from deprived backgrounds managed to push up the pass rate by, say 10%, which is half of what teachers were recommending, their heads will be exploding, because at some point somebody's going to have to say, haven't the SNP done well? in closing the attainment gap and getting better results. Or they're going to have to turn around and say, oh, well, it's all a sham.
It's the same. It's the same right now, where you've got, as I say, you've got politicians who are away through to Glasgow to protest with the school pupils today. Know that they're jumping on a bandwagon, eh? But you've got politicians saying, hold it, this is disgusting. These disadvantaged kids from disadvantaged backgrounds were marked down more. But the attainment actually went up this year. And the
gap narrowed.
No, the gap narrowed, but the actual attainment, the bottom 20%, although people are complaining about them being moderated down, their actual achievements went up this year. They got slightly better exam results than they did last. So it kind of...
I was annoyed by one or two of the journals today, especially my friend Tom, whatever his name is, on the Express. He referenced Ian Murray and the Lib Dems, and he talked about grade robbers. Obviously, these must have been the headlines in the tabloids that I didn't see. She skelped him for that. She said, I'm not answering questions about that.
I think she done exactly what she needed to treat that with the contempt that it deserves. And as I say, frankly, when you get a Neil Findlay jumping on the bandwagon, other than the fact that if you're on the bandwagon, you're liable to bounce off the other end because he's such a chub. But when you get him jumping on the bandwagon, you can usually say that if Neil Findlay is 100% behind something, it's wrong. Because he's never often right, the bold Neil.
Well, it was Ian Murray that got quoted.
What all of their education ministers, well, they're not ministers, are they? What are they? Shadows, should be asked is, if you've got a problem with the mediation, can you explain the 20% rise for the least deprived? How did the SNP achieve that?
I've asked enough of people on Twitter that, and not one of them's come back with an answer.
No, of course they haven't, because they're looking for a fight, not an answer. Okay, have we done that to death yet, guys?
Well, the only other thing, you're right, and if any of them had the guts to come back with an answer to that, I'd then ask them, so what system would you have put in place instead?
Aye,
because
well,
they're always brilliant at whinging about everything, particularly Scottish Labour. They're past masters at whining.
but that's the classic opposition answer to that is, oh, it's not our job to govern, it's our job to criticise governments.
No, it's your job to be a government in waiting. That's why they've constantly been in opposition for years, because none of the opposition parties in Scotland looked like they ever could be a government in waiting.
Okay, let's move on to gorgeous George Galloway, Catman, as he's affectionately known in this house.
Yes.
Alliance for Unity, Jimmy.
Aye, I followed it when they appeared on Twitter. Just for comedy value, I tend to follow quite a lot of opposition, shall we say, because it's always handy to know what they're thinking, what they're talking about. But George Galloway, it genuinely was for comedy value, because that's kind of what George is these days. But it's noticeable there's a couple of others appeared on the scene. Smash, what are they? I think Smash the SNP have rebranded themselves now. They intend to run, they're saying they intend to run as a party, which will be interesting to get it past the Electoral Commission, as the, oh God, what were they called now? They basically End Holyrood, End Devolution Party. But George's one's interesting. As I say, we're following it on Twitter. It's noticeable, they're awfully proud of the fact that they've got more Twitter followers than the Scottish Liberal Democrats, which, let's be clear, is not in my book an achievement. But I've noticed, you know how the human brain's brilliant at noticing patterns of behaviour, things that happen. George Galloway and his merry band of retweeters, you'd almost think they were a bot farm, guys, because at 8 o'clock, at 8 p.m. and at midnight, they put out an awful lot of tweets, all within the same 5 minutes. You'd almost think they had a wee operation set up with 30 mobile phones and 30 Twitter accounts that they'd made up just to pump all this crap round about each other. I'm very suspicious of the fact that their candidates that they've set up, I mean, seriously, they've picked some of the world's most, it's like UKIP on speed. The only one that hasn't appeared so far is David Coburn. but some of their candidates are absolute belters. You know, it's the...
Did Coburn not just recently try to join the Tory party and get ejected?
I think he did try and join the Tories, mate. Aye, but
think
it's
so.
like Screaming Lord Sutch has come back in a cat suit and decided to be George Galloway for a while. Remember how Screaming Lord Sutch, he could find a donut for every constituency in Britain. He
Aye.
could always find somebody to wear that big bonnet and that. Well, George seems to have got to sell a rare list. He's got an independent councillor from Glenrothes who was absolutely apoplectic on Twitter yesterday. She was vastly entertaining, but clearly has a bit of a tide mark round her neck because her head's jammed between the cheeks of you know what. And there's a few, mate. There's a feudal landlord down in the southwest of Scotland who's, I think he's been made number 2 on the list because Gorgeous George is number 1 on that list in there, because if they're going to get any votes, it's going to be in the southwest. Eh?
Aye. I can't actually quite see George fitting in at the Saturday market down there somehow. Stuart, thoughts on Gorgeous George's party?
I've not been following it. Sorry.
Oh, right. Okay.
I get my kill at him, mate. I've no idea how he's going to ask Unionists for their vote, and he's asking Unionists to vote for him. What happens when one of them asks him about his policy on Ireland, where he's always been of the opinion that Ulster didn't exist and the 6 counties need to be reunited with the rest of Ireland? Can you imagine him saying that to a Unionist audience?
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. He's obviously burnt his bridges with the Muslim communities down south.
Aye.
Stuart, Peter Bell's piece today.
I read it last night. What's Peter saying? Peter's saying that the wind has got up the Tories, so something must be happening. I'm not sure what else he did say, because it's what we've been saying for the last quite a few weeks. He's just kind of summed it up quite well. No, honestly, I'm having a day that I'm not really sure what to say about it, because I did read it, but I just thought that's what we've been saying for weeks. So.
Well, I think they're definitely, they've upped the ante again. Yet another relaunch of unionism is good for you. Please vote Unionist. I think Peter's a bit more depressed about things than I am. I think, you know, when the Unionists come out with their lies, the likes of Dougie Ross saying that Nicola Sturgeon signed up to never having another referendum, for example. I'm disappointed that the SNP didn't call out their lies. I'm disappointed that the rebuttal group has disappeared completely. But I'm quite encouraged that there's an awful lot of yesers out there, people in the wee yes groups and that are happily to put out the truth that is a lie. I'm not so sure, you know, back in the last referendum, I didn't think enough people had enough information. But right now, I think we've got plenty. We can point to the Edinburgh Agreement and say there's nothing in that says this is once in a generation.
It brings us back to the old chestnut that we've discussed before, an SNP rebuttal unit, which never has managed to get off the ground.
No, Norrie, I had a look for it on Twitter, mate, and they've had, I think they tweeted once in June and once in July, which is ludicrous given everything that's going on.
I do think that, I think Peter, because of his reach, is right to publish on this and basically warn, because that's been Bojo one week, Gove the next week, and Richie Sunak this week. And I presume none of them have actually gone in front of the brave Scottish public. It's all been in sheds belonging to Tory donors, as usual. Where's Sunak been today? Do we know?
A Glasgow factory. It looked like an engineering factory, and he stood there live on BBC News this morning. He took bland questions about whatever it was, furlough or whatever it was, but it basically wasn't challenged at all. It was just a party political piece.
Do we know if he's done a May and only invited certain journalists?
There was no journalist there. He was asked a question from the studio behind the camera.
Well, there must have been somebody there, surely.
Uh,
If there
so
was a
he's-
camera there.
Cameraman.
So he's only speaking to the studio, which means he has done a mate. He's only speaking to BBC or Sky, whoever was covering them.
Right, so that they're protecting themselves. I notice as well that Twitter is now going to label state broadcasters' tweets. The BBC is not considered by Twitter to be a state broadcaster.
That is
apparently.
ridiculous. The BBC Charter says it is their duty to defend the state.
Yeah, but Twitter doesn't think that makes them a state broadcaster.
Oh my goodness me.
Just pointing that out.
I want to throw my hat in the air and scream.
It'd be interesting to get a definitive description from Twitter as to what constitutes a state broadcaster. Are they going to just tell us that it's enemies of the West? Is it just going to be?
No, their definition involves who pays for you. So if the government pays for you, you're a state broadcaster, which doesn't apply to the BBC.
Oh, that's a technicality.
If you have freedom of editorial, you're not a state broadcaster.
It's stuffed by Tory party people at the top.
That's basically, by their definition, the BBC are not a state broadcaster because the public pay for the BBC through the license fee and they are free editorial to do what they want. The fact that they want to be supportive of the government is neither here nor there.
Yeah.
That's according to Twitter.
Yeah, well, as I say, mate, I'm encouraged that there's an awful lot of people in Scotland who are far more politically engaged and far more politically aware and would call out lies. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to actually get on camera to call out those lies. You can do it online, and you can tell Unionist supporters online, by the way, you're talking nonsense. Take a look at this. Take a look at the evidence.
Well, the breeze I feel at the moment is that what the Westminster government do and are going to do is going to piss off the English towards Scotland. I don't think they understand that the criticism they're leveling at Scotland
That was a very interesting article. I don't know.
Well, it doesn't piss off the Scots. It pisses off the English.
That piece in the Telegraph.
Aye. Oh God,
it was a good read. I read it, Stuart, but I read it.
That I messaged you.
Yeah, but yes. I read it in the knowledge that you wonder sometimes, you know, when you see a journalist writing something like that, you wonder if they're writing that just
for clicks.
Just for clicks, yes, because the reality, you would hope anyway, the reality is that a journalist on a national newspaper is slightly better informed. That came across as a slightly ill-informed piece to me.
That was written for an English audience.
Oh yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Because it was all about this belief that English voices aren't heard in Scotland. Absolute garbage. Absolutely. I really wish these guys would just come and sit in Scotland for a week. Just watch the telly and read the papers.
Look, just for something Jimmy said there about, you know, newspaper journalists down south. It's noticeable that Peter Oborne, a man, a right-wing journalist with a great, I respect him. He had three articles rejected by the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, and the Spectator that he's been writing for years and years and years. He's now been nominated for the Orwell Prize. He now gets published by Open Democracy.
I'm not entirely sure I would agree he's right-wing now. He always wrote for the right-wing press, certainly.
He's always been libertarian.
Yeah, I think that's more fair, but libertarian in the nicest
He
sense
wouldn't
of the
deny
word.
that he's right-wing. And I mean, there are aspects of a right-wing philosophy that aren't necessarily that evil.
It's the method to getting there.
Look, there's nothing wrong with cricket and warm beer, you know.
There are right-wing commentators out there that aren't necessarily evil either. There are people out there who I disagree with, but I can definitely respect what they have to say. I can definitely respect how they write it, and I mean, my God, I'd cheerfully punch Will Self in the face if he walked up to me in the street. But I
Right.
also kind of
But I mean,
respect the things that come out of his mouth.
the good thing is that basically the editors at these three periodicals that I mentioned have had their nose put out of joint because it's Peter Oborne that's up for the prize.
Yeah, yeah.
Aye.
And
Well,
by
it's
the way, I see the Evening Standard is going to lose 30% of its staff.
how unfortunate is
What?
that to buy? Is that to buy Evgeny Lebedev or whatever his name is a nice big ermine robe?
Probably.
Or do you think
Probably.
they're all going to go back to Moscow?
I doubt it. They
But
own
what about Dominic
own too
Cummings?
much property in London.
Didn't he spend 3 years in Moscow learning his craft?
Yes, he did. But
He did, along with young Mr. Elliot, although not at the same time, I believe.
well, they've got to have a different person making the tea. The other article that caught my eye today was Joyce McMillan in Scotsman, I think it was, asking an unusual question in these times. What happened to the alliance that the SNP and the Labour Party once had? I.e., she's really talking about devolution, which is 20 odd years ago.
That's not very long period. It was only a narrow window, really.
It was a very uneasy alliance, but it certainly helped bring about a Hollywood Parliament that for many, many years it looked like we would never get.
Well, what I found interesting about it, harking back, she said she'd been looking back in the archives, and she makes a valid point. I mean, another article today was talking about the movement right of the SNP to the right, and an alliance with the Labour Party would shift them back to the left in a lot of ways. I mean, things like land reform, etc., could be genuinely put on the agenda.
Aye, but Labour didn't have any ideas on land reform, mate. Have you heard anybody from Scottish Labour come out with anything worthwhile in the last 10 years, say?
The Labour Party hasn't had a good idea since the NHS.
Look, all the land reform stuff has been coming from one man, Andy Whiteman.
Well, Commonweal and Andy Whiteman, yeah.
I was going to say, I think there's people out there in Commonweal, for example, but they'll talk about, Commonweal will talk about ideas, they'll chuck stuff around there in a way that Labour just don't. They just basically agree a policy and that's it, end of story. And let's be honest, most of their policies are pretty wishy-washy. They've not got any...
Well, they don't have any policies at the moment because Keir Starmer hasn't told them what they are. They have general, they have the usual, we don't want kids to be poor stuff, but they don't have policies yet. So it'll be interesting. I would imagine that the Holyrood Labour Party will be able to marry quite comfortably with what Stammers comes up with. But here's the question. Is it time for a new party of the left? I mean, would it be a good thing for the Labour Party to split? Well, the Labour support to split between independents and the Union, both to create parties of the left, or, well, as left as they can be without being...
The Labour Party in Scotland cannot survive without money from London.
Yeah, okay.
I think right on that. I think, Norrie, I think what you're suggesting, it won't actually happen until after independence, because at that point, Labour may have some relevance, because at that point they may become electable, or even they will become influential, because in an independent Scotland, you're not going to have a hegemony. You're not going to have you might have the SNP winning the first elections, but there would be splits within the SNP as well. So there would be new parties forming at that point.
I was wondering if the fact that we won an independence referendum, got our independence, Labour could then be just a little bit more reasonable about supporting some of the policies of the SNP.
I'm thinking more about the situation in Ireland, both north and south, how weak Labour is in the Republic and invisible in the North.
Sinn Féin are the party of the left, though, aren't they?
Well, yes, but they're also
Aye, but Labour didn't challenge them on that. You know, Labour didn't. They were so scared of the
Well, maybe-
politics of religion in Ireland that they actually became scared of any kind of politics.
they got
They're
SDL.
just a shadow.
the
Yeah, I was gonna
SDLP,
say,
don't forget John Hume, who died.
John
this week,
Hume's party was.
he was a great man, but his party had a kind of loose coalition with the Labour Party.
Just as I say, the Joyce Milne piece made me think about what the ground would look like after independence, and how much more powerful the left would be. I mean, it would be feasible for alliances, Labour Party and Greens, Labour Party and SNP, Labour Party, Greens and SNP.
Well, you've got people out there with voices, mate. People like a Jonathan Shafi or a George Kerrivan. You do have voices out there on the left that do have ideas, but their ideas they're certainly not going to be taken up by any Labour Party at the moment, because the Labour Party's main the raison d'etre in Scotland since 2012 is unionism. They're just the second party of unionism.
I'm not even sure they're the second party.
They're wedded to the union in such a way that Scottish Labour never, ever should have been.
And don't forget how angry they are because the SNP stole all their clothes.
Aye, but Stuart, there's still plenty of Labour Party people that think the SNP are an absolute con, they're tartan Tories, and the Labour vote will go back to Scottish Labour. That's how deluded some of the people in that party are.
Well, Scottish Labour will have to find a way to allow their supporters to support independence.
Or they'll
Because
never
when we do get our independence, they're going to need them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's where they've lost. There are many party members of the SNP whose natural home is Labour, but they believe in independence, and Labour has made it impossible to be a member of that party whilst believing in Scottish independence. You can't do the two things. You can't be a Labour supporter and an independent supporter. And that is because of Labour Party policy at their HQ in Glasgow and their HQ in London. And frankly, I think the National Labour Party are more likely to soften their position on independence than Scottish Labour ever are.
Well,
they did last year, didn't they, temporarily?
Well, I actually think that's the big problem. I think their policy on independence is shifting sands.
Which one?
It will depend entirely.
Which one?
Whether they
London or
London.
London and Glasgow. You think so?
Yeah, I think the hierarchy in Scotland is unionist. But I do believe that London, it just isn't important enough to them. I mean, they must know they don't need Scottish votes. Well, they need English votes to win.
What have we got to look forward to in the now that when everybody gets back from their holidays? We've got Ian Murray, the only face of Labour in Scotland, and we know what an animal he is. And we've got Ruth Davidson coming back as the spokesperson temporarily in Holyrood, but then also going to the Lords in London. I mean, what do we expect?
Interestingly, I can see the three of them standing on a platform together quite happily.
Yeah, exactly.
Quite happily. I can't see Richard Leonard there.
Well, I can see Willie Rennie making the sandwiches.
He would be totally overshadowed. And that applies to Willie Rennie as well. Totally overshadowed by those three.
Yeah,
but that's your dream team for the Unionists.
Now that Ruth's going to the House of Lords, maybe she'll know what to do the farmyard animals thing anymore. So maybe that leaves a wee role for Willie to fill.
Of course, he does the same trick, doesn't he?
Aye, we'll mind that thing with the pigs pumping behind him at the last election.
Oh, he definitely did. He outshone Ruthie on that one.
I think that's the pound of flesh she owes for our ermine, is to be the photo opportunist of the Unionists. I have no doubt the deal done is, right, Ruth, You're up there until we don't need you there.
But don't forget, she'll be on all kinds of TV, soft TV, good morning shows and quiz shows. She'll be all over the place.
It also means that Douglas Ross can get absolutely pumped in next year's election and have no responsibility for it. They blame Ruth and she goes down to London anyway, and he still remains as leader. So there's no imperative to change a leader that gets absolutely hammered in an election.
Can you see Douglas Ross stepping aside that much?
Well,
he's got too much of an ego. He'll want his face in the papers.
All right. But thinking back to Peter Bell's summary of what we can expect from London, the shuffling of whatever they are thinking about down there. What kind of next moves are we expecting from them? We're expecting them not to shut down Holyrood, but what are they going to do to remove more powers?
I think they're going to try and bypass Holyrood. They've done as big a grab of powers as is feasible for them at the moment, but I think they'll start shifting powers into councils. So money will go direct to councils, bypassing Holyrood. That'll be the next move.
We'll get free ports in Oborne and Aberdeen.
They've got to be very careful with that. The Freeport thing, I think it's a misnomer. I think
Scotland will get one free port.
I don't think they'll do it, mate. I think it's too.
And it will be in the North Sea, so it doesn't impact on Liverpool's free port.
I don't think they'll follow through on free ports, mate. I think there's not enough money to be had for it. It makes very, very little.
What about things that are kind of attractive to local people, which is to extend the railway from Tweedbank down to Carlisle?
They won't take transport off the Scottish government. There's too many pitfalls there. It appeals to ways to attack the Scottish government. Norrie,
they've got to be very careful about direct funding. The Scotland Act specifically forbids interference with, and that includes direct funding to councils. The
Scotland Act also dictates that everything that isn't held at Westminster is devolved.
Yes, I know that, mate, and that's why they've done their internal market thing to get around that. But if they start in any way trying to provide funding to Scottish local authorities and bypassing Holyrood to do it, at that point, Nicola Sturgeon's within her rights to go, you know what? That is an absolute betrayal of everything that has happened in Scotland in the last 20 years. Call a referendum.
I think they'll cover it with things like city deals. They'll have regional deals where
they can't do a city deal without the approval of Holyrood, because Holyrood puts up half the funding.
They'll pass a law. They've got 80 seats. You know, that's what I see. I see them. They've got most of the power they want for their trade deals, and to weaken it, Holyrood further, they're going to start pushing money in, bypassing Holyrood.
Aye, that's what they're going to do, and they're going to focus on high profile, getting more media coverage, and bypassing Holyrood with the money. That's the way I see it's going to go.
And I think they might even do things like steel projects. I think, road projects could well be topped up with a couple of million from Westminster, and it'll then become a Westminster project a year before it finishes.
What about tying in money like that, let's say for the Southwest, in with their ideas to split Scotland up into regions, so that if come a referendum, they could carve out the islands in the north and the south of Scotland to stay with the Union.
They then have to fight international law. Very hard to do. Very difficult. How can you keep a seat on the Security Council if you won't obey international law? Oh, sorry, you can be China. I forgot. I'm exhausted, guys. Finish?
Yes.
Right.
Pippa Creera in the Daily Mirror. Watch them on Sunday. I think they're about to run another story with because the people that said that Dominic Cummings made a second trip and he absolutely denied it. And everybody just accepted that he had evidence on his phone to say that he was in London the day that he was meant to be up north for the second day. They made a complaint to the police ombudsman that the Durham police did not take their complaint seriously. There are now 4 witnesses that state Dominic Cummings was there on the 19th when he says he wasn't. So I think the Mirror are going to run another story on it.
Well, isn't that retired chief prosecutor in Manchester that gets the big glasses gets wheeled out every now and again? Isn't he also involved? He's written to insist that there's a prosecution by the Durham police.
I know nothing about this at all.
Yeah, it's been bubbling under for a while, mate. But as I say, they made a complaint yesterday to the Police Complaints Authority, and as I say, there are now 4 witnesses that categorically state they seen Dominic Cummings in Durham on a day he absolutely denies he was there, but he said that data on his phone and pictures on his phone would prove he was in London, and that was accepted by the press and the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister said he's seen that evidence. Nobody else has seen it. But if this blows up again, does it become an issue if if there isn't that evidence on Dominic Cummings' phone, or is it just going to tell us that he deleted it because it wasn't important?
I think they believe they can get away with anything.
Yeah, I believe they think they do. Yeah, they believe they can.
There is no moral compass in Downing Street at the moment at all.
Well, we certainly know Boris hasn't got one.
So I actually think this could blow up any way it likes, and they'll find a way to keep Cummings. Whether it means they've got to fire him and hire a company that's hired him, I don't know. But I can't see him going now. I can't see what could be worse than's already gone before, and I think that's the way they'll view it.
Yeah, you're probably right, mate. But if he was found to have sat in that press conference in the Rose Garden at Downing Street, and if he was found to have lied to the country, do you think he'd manage to stay?
Yes.
Okay, pretend I'm a Tory. He was irreplaceable during the pandemic, so he had to tell Porky's to get you off his back.
He's never done anything in the pandemic that's useful.
I thought he was running the country.
No, the Prime Minister.
Why be lied to? Okay, guys, we'll call it a day at that. Thanks for listening, folks. Thank you, Stuart Lockhead. Thank you, Jimmy Hutton. And thank me, Norrie Stewart. And we'll see you all on Sunday. We'll have a day off tomorrow to recover from our monumental hangovers. Cheers just now, folks.